welcome to an AC News special report. I'm Conall Mansbridge. Tonight, an inside look at the Northern Gateway Pipeline, its path to implementation, the hurdles it faces, and what, if any, benefits it can bring to Canadians across the country.
The Northern Gateway Pipeline will extend from the oil sands in Alberta and travel 1,177 kilometers across Alberta and British Columbia. At full capacity, the pipeline will carry 525,000 barrels of oil sands product per day. Its current model route travels mainly through the northern areas of both provinces, but must cut across a number of Aboriginal traditional territories in order to eventually reach its final destination of Kitimat, a port with access to the Douglas Channel.
In recent years, there has been a push not only within Canada, but throughout the world towards more oil-centric economies. With this shift in interests, numerous proposals regarding the transportation of oil have been of central debate among Canadian political economists and regular Canadian citizens alike. The Keystone XL, Trans Mountain, and Energy East pipelines all have garnered significant attention and consideration throughout the country. However, no pipeline has been subject to as much debate as Enbridge's Northern Gateway. To discuss the nature of this project, Adam Duffy is coming to us live with information regarding the contemporary Canadian oil situation. Adam?
Yeah, Conall, happy to be here. Thanks for having me today.
Hi, Adam. Can you tell us a bit about Canada's oil resource sector today?
Of course, yeah. Canada's oil exists primarily in the vast oil sands found in the province of Alberta right now. So, current proven oil reserves in Canada are around 173 billion barrels. Of that, about 168 billion barrels are found in the oil sands of Alberta. So the number, however, is estimated to rise by perhaps some 300 billion barrels as extraction technology advances become more viable within Canada. So if these figures are accurate, what it would mean is that the estimates would exceed the Saudi Arabian reserves and would propel Canada into a position of being the globe's leading holder of oil resources.
Right. Now, what do these figures mean, though, really, in terms of Canadian, say, exports of oil?
Yeah, that's a good question, Colin. It's one I get asked all the time. Canada's exports represent a sizable portion of the oil and natural gas it extracts. So, as statistics from Natural Resource Canada show that in 2010, Canada exported $90 billion of energy, of which 98.4% was to the United States. Furthermore, around 98% of the petroleum products and 100% of the natural gas Canada exports goes to the United States. As one can see in these figures, the dominance of the U.S. market for Canadian energy exports is very strong right now, and the energy extraction industry in Canada and buyers in the United States are deeply integrated.
Wow, so from those figures, it sounds as if Canada is extraordinarily tied to the United States, in terms of energy at least. Now, is there any way that Canada could diversify its interests in that regard?
Yeah, of course, and that's largely the goal of the Northern Gateway pipeline. Proponents right now are arguing for a greater system of oil transportation infrastructure that would open Canada up to the Asian markets. Obviously Canada is interested in diversifying its energy exports, and there's little question that such a diversification is a significant part of the government's current thrust. Our Prime Minister Stephen Harper, has stated that one of his key foreign trade objectives is to sell more energy to China. In his address, Harper emphasized not only the benefits of such a plan, but the perceived necessity, noting that Canada's continued economic growth and security will depend in significant part on the co-prosperity of this Asia-Pacific region.
Well, this certainly seems like a very important and complicated topic within today's Canadian political economy. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Adam.
Oh, thanks for having me, Conall. It was my pleasure.
Welcome back to the story of the pipeline. Since its original proposal in 2009, the path to potential implementation for the Northern Gateway pipeline has been one riddled with obstacles. Those who are weary of this pipeline have lobbied since this initial announcement for an assurance that if this pipeline is ever to be constructed, environmental, economic, and Aboriginal concerns must be addressed. Now, the governing body in charge of the pipelines in Canada is the National Energy Board, an independent regulatory entity which oversees the construction, operation, and abandonment of pipelines that cross international borders or provincial boundaries, as well as the associated pipeline tolls and tariffs. Now, in response to the concerns regarding the Northern Gateway proposal, the NEB has commissioned a joint review panel, a separate and distinct independent body which would report back to the National Energy Board to conduct an environmental and technical evaluation of the Northern Gateway project. Beginning in 2009, and after 4 years of intensive research and interviews, the Joint Review Panel submitted their report to the NEB on December 13, 2013. After 4 years of taking a scientific and precautionary approach, the panel found that the project, if built and operated in compliance with the conditions set out, it would be, in fact, in the public interest. Now, the JRP recommended that the project be subjected to 209 required conditions, the adherence to which would ensure that the construction and routine operation of the project would cause no significant adverse environmental effects, with the exception of cumulative effects for certain populations of caribou and grizzly bear. In these two cases, the panel found that the cumulative effects, as a result of this project and other projects, activities or actions, are likely to be at the low end of the range of possible significance. Thus, the panel recommended that these effects be found to be justified in the circumstances. This message has been echoed by Stephen Harper, who has stated publicly that science, not politics, should rule the debate. Adam Duffy explains.
Stephen Harper has addressed public concerns regarding the safety of the Northern Gateway pipeline.
I've been very clear that decisions on these kinds of projects are made through an independent evaluation conducted by scientists into the economic costs and risks that are associated with the project.
Following an examination of the JRP's report, the Governor and Council, a representative of the federal government, accepted the findings of the document. On June 17, 2014, the federal government established that, after receiving the report, the designated project is not likely to cause significant adverse environmental effects, and that the adverse environmental effects that the designated project is likely to cause are justified in the circumstances. However, provincial approval from both the provinces of Alberta and British Columbia will also be required in order that the process go through. In Alberta, the process was quick and imposed no additional conditions upon the pipeline. BC, though, has requested that 5 of its own conditions be met as well. The first of these conditions would be the successful completion of the environmental review process. In the case of the Northern Gateway pipeline, that would mean a recommendation by the National Energy Board Joint Review Panel that the project can proceed. To date, this is the only completion of the 5 that has been completed. Secondly, there would need to be world-leading marine oil spill responses, prevention and recovery systems for BC's coastline and ocean to manage and mitigate the risks and costs of heavy oil pipelines and shipments. Thirdly, world-leading practices for land oil spill prevention, response and recovery systems to manage and mitigate the risks and costs of heavy oil pipelines. Fourth, there must be legal requirements regarding Aboriginal and treaty rights must be addressed, and First Nations are provided with the opportunities, information, and resources necessary to participate in and benefit from this pipeline. Finally, British Columbia must receive a fair share of the fiscal and economic benefits of a proposed heavy oil project that reflects the level and nature of the risk borne by the province, the environment, and the taxpayers within British Columbia.
The 209 conditions laid out in the JRP report, in addition to BC's 5 conditions, are representative of the major hurdles that the pipeline still faces before it is ever going to be green-lit for implementation. As was mentioned, concerns regarding environmental and Aboriginal issues are prevalent. To illustrate these topics, AC News has set out on a field reporting mission to uncover the facts and establish a clear view of the impacts of the Northern Gateway Pipeline.
Environmental concerns represent a key component of the backlash to plans to implement the Northern Gateway Pipeline. Often, opponents of the pipeline bring up Enbridge's record, which is below par. Specifically, the Kalamazoo River spill in 2010 in Michigan, as caused by an Enbridge pipeline, released 3.3 million liters of oil into the river. It was the largest on-land oil spill in U.S. history, and it has cost the company more than $1 billion. Many are justifiably concerned that a similar disaster may occur in BC and disturb the pristineness of our beautiful province. In line with these concerns, in a report conducted by Dr. Tom Gunton, Director of the School of Resource and Environmental Management at Simon Fraser University, it stated that British Columbia will be hit by more oil spills than Enbridge has predicted. If the Northern Gateway Pipeline is built, this study predicts that 776 oil and condensate pipeline spills over 50 years will occur, which is 31 more times frequent than Enbridge's estimate of 25 spills. Dr. Gunton said the spill risk assessments provided by Enbridge are so far off the mark that the Federal Joint Review Panel, the JRP, now reviewing the project can't accurately assess the risks. The problem is that the panel does not have complete evidence before them on the likelihood of an oil spill, and the evidence they do have from Enbridge has serious deficiencies in methodology. So it's impossible for the Joint Review Panel to make an informed, evidence-based assessment, Dr. Gunton thinks. It is clear that there are a diverse set of opinions in terms of the environmental hazards of this proposal. Recall the video presented earlier in the program, sponsored by Enbridge, which detailed the path the pipeline would take, as well as the deepwater connection out of Kitimat into the Douglas Channel. Now, take a moment to watch the way that the video undersold the true environmental difficulty of exporting oil through Kitimat.
Looking at the video, it is clear that Enbridge underestimates the difficulty that transporting oil out of Kitimat will be. Not only is the scale grossly inaccurate, it also leaves out 1,000 square kilometers of islands that are in the channel. This is how Enbridge would like you to see it. Unfortunately, this is how it actually looks, with the 1,000 square kilometers of islands included. It is clear that there are many difficult areas to travel through within the Douglas Channel.
Despite these figures, there are other factors which must be considered regarding the transportation of oil. Much of Canada's oil today is transported by train, which when compared to oil transported by pipelines is far more dangerous. One need only look back to the Lac-Mégantic train disaster of 2013, where 30 buildings were destroyed and 47 people died as a result of a derailment of a train, which was carrying oil. The explosion was the 4th deadliest train disaster in Canadian history. The transition to pipelines is very popular in the oil industry for economic and safety-related reasons. Between 2000 and 2011, 99.99996% of crude and petroleum product moved through federally operated pipelines without a spill. Furthermore, between 2003 and 2012, 92% of all accidents either resulted in no releases or very minor ones, and only 1% of all accidents resulted in releases of greater than 1,000 meters.
Thanks to Adam Duffy for his excellent fieldwork as per usual in that special AC reporting mission. Environmental hurdles are only one of many challenges facing the Northern Gateway Pipeline. Recently, there has been a significant amount of controversy surrounding the role of First Nations and their claims to land use relating to this pipeline project. As previously mentioned, the 4th of BC's 5 conditions refers to the respecting of Aboriginal land title and treaty rights throughout the pipeline process. BC has required that First Nations people upon whose land the pipeline will cross be provided with the info and resources necessary to participate in and benefit from the project. However, it is not clear yet that certain First Nation groups have any interest at all in having their land be used for the purposes of the shipment of oil sands products. For example, Union of BC Indian Chiefs Grand Chief Stuart Phillip has ruled out any sort of deal with Enbridge that could see use of the project going ahead for a share of the revenue or a cash payment. As he said, "When I am standing out in the land, shoulder to shoulder, it's not going to be for a better deal. It's going to be to protect the land and the environment." This issue has also been a complicated legal battle. In particular, last year's Supreme Court ruling in Chilcotin versus British Columbia was a landmark decision which has serious ramifications for the Northern Gateway project. To illuminate this, we'll be hearing from Aboriginal Affairs correspondent Adam Duffy, live via satellite. How are you doing, Adam?
Hi, Conall. Thanks for having me today.
Right, so can you tell us a little bit about the legal story behind Chilcotin versus British Columbia?
Absolutely, yeah. First off, it's important to understand the full picture of this legal action taken by the Chilcotin Nation before we get into the Supreme Court ruling that came about in June of 2014. So members of the Chilcotin Nation, under former Chief Roger William, filed a claim seeking a declaration of Aboriginal title to 2 tracts of land, which would be the claim area in this case. He also sought a declaration that the Hani-Watiin had Aboriginal rights to hunt and trap in the claim area. As the claim was motivated by opposition to the logging set to occur in the claim area, he also sought a declaration that forestry permits authorizing the proposed logging infringed on the Chilcotin's Aboriginal right to land title. However, the case was that after a lengthy trial, the BC Supreme Court dismissed the claim for a declaration of Aboriginal title because the pleading sought an all-or-nothing declaration of title, and there was insufficient evidence, to establish title over the entire claim area. The case was then appealed all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada.
Okay, so then tell our viewers what was so significant about this Supreme Court ruling for First Nations in Canada.
Yeah, the case upheld the First Nations' claim to Aboriginal land title and rights over a portion of the traditional territory. Now, this was significant because this is the first case in which the Supreme Court of Canada has confirmed Aboriginal title over specific areas of land. In its decision, Canada's top court agreed that a semi-nomadic tribe can claim land title even if it uses it only some of the time, and the court set out a 3-point test to determine this land title. The 3-point test considered 3 things, obviously: the occupation, the continuity of habitation on the land, and the exclusivity in the area.
Adam, again, for our viewers, can you describe what constitutes land title?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was just about to get to that also. In its ruling of Chilcotin First Nations Aboriginal land title over a wide area of the south and west BC's William Lake, which it considers its traditional territory, the court also established what title means, which is basically centered around the right to the benefits associated with the land and the right to use it, enjoy it, and profit from it. However, it is important to note that the court declared that title is not absolute, meaning that economic development can still proceed on the land where title is established as long as one of 2 conditions are met. So the 2 conditions are, the first one being economic development on the land where title is established has the consent of the First Nations, and then failing that, the government must make the case that development is pressing and substantial and meets its fiduciary duty to the Aboriginal group. In other words, the decision places a greater burden on governments to justify economic development on Aboriginal land, which is relevant, obviously, to the Northern Gateway pipeline.
So what I think is important to ask following all of this then is, what are the implications of this historic decision?
Yeah, that's tough to say. In light of this decision, many First Nations leaders have indicated that they will argue that the proposed pipeline and its recent approval by the federal government, pending the conditions from the Joint Review Panel, is a constitutional violation of their Aboriginal land rights in their respective territories. However, this will be difficult for them to prove. The thing is that while the court has confirmed that Aboriginal title can exist on a territorial basis, title still remains an extremely difficult, time-consuming, and expensive process to prove. So in my professional opinion, I would say that the full implications of the court's decision will not be felt for years. This will without question present many hurdles for the forestry companies in their ability to clear tracks for the Enbridge pipeline, and they will likely have to have the support of the First Nations before this can go ahead.
Well, thanks for being with us today, Adam. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Cal. Anytime.
Taking into account this variety of obstacles and considerations, political opposition against the pipeline has been strong. Indeed, all three major opposition parties have spoken up against Northern Gateway, citing a number of concerns. The leader of the NDP, Thomas Mulcair, has remained adamantly opposed to the implementation of the Northern Gateway pipeline, mainly for environmental and Aboriginal reasons. As he has stated, the implementation of a pipeline would set a dangerous precedent for resource development in this country. He has also been clear that allowing supertankers into the Douglas Channel is madness, and it should not take place. Overall, the pipeline process itself suffers from one major flaw, Mulcair claims, which is the fact that we are not dealing with First Nations on a nation-to-nation basis. Liberal Party leader Justin Trudeau, much like Mulcair, is vehemently in opposition of the pipeline. The Northern Gateway pipeline, Trudeau claims, threatens not only the British Columbia coastal economy, but the jobs of thousands of people who live on the ocean. As he has further said, the Northern Gateway pipeline places an unacceptable level of risk on British Columbia's coastal economy and environment. From fishing to tourism, those individuals whose jobs and livelihoods depend on the Pacific Ocean have not been assured that a catastrophic spill can be prevented. Thus, Trudeau's opposition to the pipeline is heavily related to the economic costs of a Pacific Coast spill. Leader of the Green Party, Elizabeth May, has been, unsurprisingly given the ideological stance of the Greens, 100% opposed to the proposed Northern Gateway pipeline. She has said, "Those of us who wish to protect our climate, our coastlines, our whales and our salmon, and respect First Nations, recognizing that we live on their territories, we will prevail." Alone in their support for the Northern Gateway pipeline has been the Conservative Party led by Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He has been in support of the project since the process began in 2009. Speaking to the Vancouver Board of Trade, he said, "We will not approve projects unless they are not only in our economic interests, but also meet the highest standards of environmental protection." Speaking on behalf of the Minister of Natural Resources, Kelly Block, said, "We have been clear that projects will only move forward if they are safe for Canadians and safe for the environment. Our decision is based on the conclusions of an independent, science-based review panel. But the proponent clearly has more work to do with the communities along the route." Having been exposed to all the facts and hurdles which stand in the way of the Northern Gateway project, we will now conclude by turning to the economic benefits and concerns related to the project, if it is implemented. At this point, we consult in-house economic analyst Adam Duffy for some insight. Hello again, Adam. Glad to have you here with us today instead of across the world as usual.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Conall. It's great to be back in the studio.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we begin the discussion with some information about the economic benefits of the Northern Gateway project?
Absolutely, Conall. Well, in terms of the general income derived from the project by each province, the numbers seem to be pretty positive across the board. Alberta, for example, would be paid over the next 30 years about $32 billion. Alternatively, BC would receive about $6.7 billion, and the Canadian federal government itself would receive about $36 billion in revenue.
Impressive.
It is really impressive. In addition, short-term and long-term job numbers in both British Columbia and BC, while they vary, are both extremely strong. In BC, it would be seen about 3,000 construction jobs and 560 long-term jobs would be created by this project. In Alberta, these numbers would be about 1,100 construction jobs and 380 long-term jobs. Moreover, depending on whether any agreement would be reached between the First Nations communities and Enbridge, the partnership could be very beneficial for both sides. The First Nations community would be able to receive about $1 billion in benefits over the next several decades if any agreement would be reached. So obviously that's a strong numbers for the Aboriginal community. So really there are a number of distinct economic benefits in addition to this for Canada related to achieving more and efficient pipeline access to the Asia-Pacific market. So currently at the moment, Canadian oil export industry is forced to export its resources to the U.S. with little other competition right now just because of Canada's geographical position. So here's an excerpt from the Canadian Ministry of Natural Resource, and it reads, currently, due to a lack of pipelines, Canadian producers are mainly limited to the U.S. market. 2.5 million barrels per day of Canadian oil are currently sold to U.S. customers at prices that are well below global crude prices. Analysis from the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce and the Bank of Montreal in 2012 indicated that Canadians were losing at least $18 billion per year, or approximately $50 million a day in revenues, just because of a lack of access to other markets. So those numbers are pretty astonishing if you ask me. Were Canada able to supply this Asia-Pacific region that I mentioned, in addition to the United States, a fundamental change in energy relationship between Canada and the United States could be bartered, with Canada being able to ask for higher prices from the U.S. for its product. So indeed, the Northern Gateway Pipeline alone is estimated to provide $300 billion in value to the Canadian economy over the next 30 years, if implemented, obviously.
Well, I mean, these are definitely the arguments in favor of the pipeline, Adam. And they do appear to be strong.
Yeah.
But for our viewers, let's hear the other side. I've heard a bit in the past about natural resource nationalist arguments. Those are really quite in play today. Can you expand on those a bit for us?
Yeah, sure. And that's obviously, economic concerns do exist today, of course. One of the main lines of argumentation comes from the Canadian natural resource nationalists, as you mentioned, who argue that Canada should work more diligently to refine more of our own oil product before exporting it to other countries, to create better jobs and add value to Canadian oil sands product. The benefits to this argument seem clear, but the truth is that the matter is more complicated than that. So critics of this line of thinking suggest that it's time to invest more heavily in Canadian refining capacity. It may have, the fact is that this time may have come and gone. Today, global refining capacity exists in great excess in both the US and in Asia. A good example that I like to use for people is that one refinery in India has the refining capacity of 60% of Canadian refineries. Another argument related to this nature of Canada and the US's respective comparative advantages is that the US Gulf Coast is geographically advantaged to serving refined, oil-hungry nations in Latin America and North Africa, I should say. Conversely, Canada is geographically advantaged in exporting to this Asian Pacific market that I mentioned, that are interested only in feeding their own refineries, desiring unrefined feedstock such as the oil sands bitumen that Canada holds in excess.
All right, well, let's hear about some of the other arguments. Tell us a bit about, say, the growing concern over Dutch disease and maybe some of the impacts on the coastline.
Sure. Yeah, like you mentioned, Dutch disease. A concern over the creeping Dutch disease in Canada represents another strain of opposition to Canada's resource exporting industry. So I'll tell you a bit about Dutch disease. Dutch disease is the phenomenon which occurs when a country's resources industry increases the value of domestic currency and harms the country's manufacturing sector as a result. Opponents of the pipeline, in tandem with natural resource nationalists, seek to avoid Canada falling further into this trap than the country already has. Furthermore, like you talked about the coastal economies, some more specific concerns relate to the potential economic damages to the BC Pacific coast if a spill were to result from this pipeline. A government study has established that the components of the ocean sector comprise about 7 to 8% of the BC total economy, so that's obviously a pretty significant portion of it. And while there is no way to accurately establish what the impact might be from a potential oil spill along BC's coastline, it can safely be assumed that a substantial spill would inevitably have profound effects on the livelihoods and the overall economy of British Columbia.
Well, all that information is very enlightening, Adam. Thank you. I'm sure our viewers have appreciated this two-sided approach to the discussion, offering both sides of the debate. Thanks for being with us today, Adam.
Absolutely, Conall. Thanks for having me.
Regardless of one's perspective on the issue of the pipeline, the hurdles it faces suggest it could see implementation no earlier than 2019. The difficulties associated with enacting all 209 conditions imposed by the Joint Review Panel, in addition to BC's own 5 conditions, it's essentially been acknowledged by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, if not tacitly. Politically, this represents a fallback position on a project once supported vigorously by the Conservatives, as well as something that explains the PM's recent silence on the issue. However, one must not overlook the fact that 2015 is an election year, and Harper's silence on a controversial issue may reflect a concern over electoral success in the fall. While many valid environmental and Aboriginal concerns stand in the way of implementation of the Northern Gateway Pipeline, from a Canadian economic perspective, the project would diversify Canadian energy export targets and benefit the country's economy as a whole. The economic benefits which have been presented here highlight the necessity that Canada does not continue with the status quo in terms of oil exports to the U.S. Canada should not continue to sell its important resources below the economic market value and should pursue strong economic ties with the growing Asian Pacific market. If this is done effectively, important steps will have been taken towards creating the energy superpower out of Canada, which Stephen Harper has attempted to achieve.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we reach the conclusion of our show tonight. We will leave you with this statement. If the 209 conditions can ever be met, something which certainly remains up in the air, as well as the 5 conditions of British Columbia, the Northern Gateway Pipeline has distinct potential to offer a number of economic benefits to the Canadian political economy. Thank you for joining us tonight for this special AC News presentation, The Story of Northern Gateway. I'm Conall Mansbridge, and that's the whole story.